Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, there have been a lot of headlines over the years about a piece of property that's just been bedeviling New Haven. Back when it was had a power plant on it that was one of the city's six, one of the dirtiest polluting power plants in our state. And decades later, as it sat vacant, English Station on Wall Island, 8.6 acres, off of Grand Avenue, right off there on the Mill River. There's a new wave of ideas about what to do with it. There's an official idea. The city of New Haven says we should spend $22 to $43 million cleaning up that property and putting an outdoor pool for a few months a year. And that idea is going ahead. The Board of Alders has approved the first steps of it. They think they might have money for a third of the cost. But there's some other folks who have been following English Station for decades, this issue, through mayoral administrations, through different ideas. Monitoring, they've had a stake in what's happening with it, from how to clean it up to what to do next. And they're here today to give us their view on what should happen with English Station. It's a big deal, one of our last big tracts of undeveloped property in New Haven. We have Lee Cruz from the Fairhaven Community Management Team. He chairs or co-chairs that?
Chair now, yeah.
It's all you.
Yeah.
Chatham Square has always been you, so we're not Fairhaven. Okay. Yeah. And then Anstis Farewell from the Urban Design League of New Haven, and Aaron Good, basically of everything, including any citizens group that's been monitoring what happens at English Station, what happens with all our public spaces and trails that we create, zoning. Have I left off 95 or 85 other?
Paul, some people are addicted to drugs and some people are addicted to going to meetings and monitoring English Station. Some people are addicted to both of those, but
yeah. And I would say the best source of information perspective of what's happening in New Haven with his X site. What's it, DFA New Haven?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Okay.
I have anything to do with that, Paul. It's like what the Israelis say about their alleged nuclear weapons.
Well, folks, let me start with Lee from Fairhaven. So you live right there in Fairhaven. English Station is right at the border of what we now call Mill River, I guess, neighborhood. It's really the edge of Worcester Square, though it's not really part of Worcester Square anymore. And Fairhaven. It's the gateway to Fairhaven. So, Lee, are you psyched for this pool? Is that like what the end game here?
The answer to that would be no. I've been working on English Station and issues around English Station since 1999. When we first heard about then Quinnipiac Energy, and we opposed.
Oh, that was that dirty deal with the city government where the guy had his friend in City Hall and he was going to have him. And they all fell apart.
Six friends got together and they were going to build a power station. Not one of them knew anything about it. And we fought that and created the New Haven Environmental Justice Coalition.
Oh, that's issues that grew out of English Station. I remember it was first called the Filthy Five, the five highest polluting power plants in Connecticut. They became the City Six, and then it closed down.
Yeah. And that, we joined the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice, Dr. Mark Mitchell, and we were joined by then State Attorney General Blumenthal, who worked with us to make sure that station did not receive the licensing. And we were very happy about that. And then, of course, the downside became that then the building was up for nothing. And so we've always been discussing with the city by ourselves, more recently with the help of Anstis and the Urban Design League, what should happen there. We've always been very clear as a community, we need more opportunities for employment and employment training that is relevant to jobs of today, and we need more housing. And we've never veered from that message.
So you want housing there, you want job training. Is that the ideal location for it, an island that might get flooded over in 10 years?
It is my understanding, and there are more expert people in the room, that the buildings that were knocked down on Grand Avenue have been remediated, and housing along Grand Avenue would narrow the divide between Worcester Square and Fairhaven.
We're specifically talking about the island.
Well, no, that's the land that is right on Grand Avenue. The island, that's a part of the controversy of like the contamination that's there. How much would it cost to remediate all or part of that building and use it for something that could produce taxes, that could produce jobs, that could produce employment versus a pool. When you look from that site to the west, less than a mile and a half away is Leap with a swimming pool. And then if you turn 90 degrees and look south, there's the pool at John Martinez.
And people don't go to that pool, do they? Someone I know who goes takes his kids to swim there. So there's almost no one ever swimming there.
Leap.
No, I'm talking about the Martinez.
The Martinez. The issue with Martinez is that there have been some mechanical issues with the pool, and so it's become unreliable. We do have people from the neighborhood that are hardcore swimmers, like David Weinreb, who's always posting when the pool is open because it's hard to tell. And after you go 2 or 3 times with your kids and it's not open, it's a disappointment, so you avoid it.
I also want to know, Martinez
that's a beautiful. By the way, that pool at John Martinez, that's a beautiful pool.
And if people want an outdoor pool, wouldn't it be like a fraction of the cost just to put it on the land there? They have all those fields and everything.
Well, I mean, there is land at Criscolo Park. There's options. We don't need a pool as inside or outside as much as, for example, Hill North or West River. Although they have the river, it's not a river you can swim in. Those are just, and I know organizers in both of those communities. I haven't asked them about a pool. I know that there's no pool in that vicinity.
So your bottom line, it sounds like, Lee, is someone who's been organizing in Fairhaven since into the last century, and you live there. You're saying that you've been consistent. You do want it cleaned up. You want to see job training or housing on that property. You do not. The neighborhood does not need another pool. There's 2 other pools that can be fixed up to work better for the public. And if we do need an outdoor pool and another pool, there's land that can be done more cheaply, and there are other neighborhoods that need it more.
The one at Leap was problematic. That has been fixed up, and people are swimming there, and just as important, they're learning to become lifeguards there. Those are jobs that our youth and maybe not so youthful people can use. That makes sense. It doesn't make sense to put an outdoor pool on a contaminated island.
And now let's get the contamination. Before I get to you answer us about the work you've been doing with other cities that are looking at decommissioned power plants, I want to ask Aaron Good, since you've also been following the City 6 issue all these years. So am I right that there are 2 levels to which a plant like this has to get cleaned up to not cause a threat to the public? If you're doing something like a pool, you have to do a lot more work on getting rid of PCBs and other pollutants so that it's not a danger to the public. That depending on the use, it costs different amounts to clean it up, correct?
Yeah, it depends on the intensity of use, and there are detailed federal guidelines about how many parts per million or parts per billion of PCBs or other contaminants are allowed to remain depending on these different intensity of use. So English Station, as a condition of the partial consent order in 2017, United Illuminating.
Let's tell people what the partial consent is. The state's been after the United Illuminating company that owned the property but no longer does. It's some invisible people who we don't know what they're going to do with it. They've been turned around. But they're responsible for the pollution. They're responsible for cleaning up. They haven't cleaned it up. That the Attorney General's office has sued them. We go back and forth. They say they're going to clean up. They do a little work. They haven't done most of it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, they were supposed to have completed the cleanup in 2019. So the partial consent order 2016, 2017, that's agreed to by United Illuminating, a legal agreement that they made with the state, with the Attorney General's office, as a condition of UI's merging with the Spanish multinational company Iberdrola. Yeah. And they were required to set aside as a floor $30 million to clean up the site to a industrial standard.
Meaning not a pool.
Well, I think a pool there's a bit of a gray area about what standard a pool is, but it does seem like it would be higher than the industrial standard that they're currently. So an additional infusion of money would be required beyond what UI is on the hook for.
How much of that $30 million have they spent? And how much work is there to do?
I think they've spent, according to their reports that they've submitted to the state, about 2/3 of that already.
And are they getting close to clean it up?
Well, unfortunately, no. I mean, a lot of that money, it has been spent to demolish and remediate the front parcel along Grand Avenue, which is Parcel A or Station B. And they've done a lot of reports and analysis on the rest of the site, but they haven't actually removed almost any of the PCBs.
So we have a regulatory agent called PURA, Public Utility Regulatory Agency or Authority.
Yeah, authority.
Authority. So they're supposed to hold their feet to the fire. So UI didn't do a promise. Did they like fine them? Did they haul them back into court?
Well, the whole tragic history of English Station, I think, reveals on so many different layers and levels the failures of utility regulation in Connecticut going back 40 years, maybe longer. And we had thought that maybe we had entered a new era of actually holding UI accountable under Marissa Gillette, who was the former chair of PIRA, and she actually initiated in 2023 very substantial fines against UI for dragging their feet on the cleanup and holding them to the commitment that they had made in the PCO. So very substantial fines that UI was on the hook for. Unfortunately, just in this March, a couple months ago, the new peer authority board, the new chair, and the other members. There's now 5 members. There used to be 3. That's kind of a whole other story. But they decided to reverse all of those fines. So all of a sudden, we're back into the bad old days of not holding UI accountable and not respecting environmental justice, neighborhoods, and communities.
What was the reason given for getting rid of the fines?
I think the reason that they gave was that they wanted some of the ongoing litigation about English Station to play out before they decided whether to revisit or reinstate that penalty.
Wow. We're talking about future English Station. So Answers, Farwell, you're deeply involved in block by block throughout the whole city, how we preserve our history, how we repurpose our history, what we knock down, what we build. You've been calling my attention, which I didn't realize, to how this is a worldwide issue of decommissioned power plants and what are people going to do with them. And the communities do a lot of different things. You sent me stuff about a conference you recently presented at where they talked about the thing in Norwalk that I think New Haven's trying to emulate, which was praised in those materials, the Manresa Wild in Norwalk.
Where they're preserving the building and reusing it.
And as a park.
No, they're preserving the building and creating a park, which is what we should look at.
Oh, so you're okay with the park idea and the pool if they preserve the building?
I think that we still come back to what does the neighborhood want. Mm-hmm. We've never in our consultations heard anyone ever bring up having a pool. And it isn't that we would be against one, but we haven't really heard a community voice about that.
And how about this issue, if we want a pool, do we want a $43 million pool near 2 other pools, or do we want it somewhere else for a lot less money, right? That seems to be Lee's point.
I think the main thing for me is we had been working with the city for about 6 months with our pro bono architects and engineers.
And that's the Urban Design League.
Urban Design League with Grimshaw Architects and different engineers that evaluated water issues and natural systems for cleaning up the land and the water, and also analyzing the PCBs, going through all of the reports at the DEP about this. And there wasn't any question among the experts about that it would be cheaper to remediate and reuse the building than to remediate and knock it down. And this was a conclusion that this is where UI and I and our organization are in agreement that that it'd be a lot more expensive to remediate and knock it down at 1 part per million, because it means that the entire building ends up in a landfill, and that changes the estimated cost of remediation from $30 to $40 million to $60. So UI sued the state and said, we signed a voluntary agreement to clean it up to industrial standards. You can't, as an equal part of this agreement, suddenly change it.
So the city says we got this donor in our back pocket who's going to give us $10 million toward that, maybe.
Yeah, and they have said to UI that the city will not require them to clean up to the park and residential standard are essentially the same. And so that means, where does the extra $30 to $20 million come from?
So Answers, are you in agreement with Lee that you'd like to see housing or job training on that site?
Well, we're in agreement with what we've heard from the neighborhood, which is Lee and many other people. The front parcel on Grand Ave, the English Station Island is divided into 3 parcels. There's the parcel that is run by McVack on the other side of the road, and then the two parcels that are the English Station property proper. There's a front parcel where there was a building that was knocked down because it was falling apart. That UI has determined that there's really no difference in cost to remediate it to industrial or residential standard. And so they are remediating that front parcel to...
Which is why when Lee says we can have housing right by the road there, that's
right.
where that can work.
Yeah.
And then you got the second half of the building is, and you're saying what you'd like, that's where you'd like to see a job training center.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
are we going to be doing jobs?
And a lot of other things, too.
Aren't we going to be doing job training at the Armory across town? And aren't we doing it right on Mill Street in Fairhaven?
But here's the difference. So one of the things with the Armory is going to be a project that will be part of New Haven Public Schools. And as I understand it, it will be traditional VOTEC disciplines, which is great, because we know those are good jobs that AI isn't going to take away. And it's part of our argument about looking at this and having the availability of this kind of facility in Fairhaven, and also it's on the busiest bus route in the region. And this is something we've talked about in depth with people interested in maritime industry and in job development. Every possible partner and has said we're absolutely on the right track. So here's the...
And you think you could raise money for that? You think there are people would come in to do it?
Yeah.
Like, drop it down?
Yeah, multiple partners. We see this as something that would be likely to be a private public partnership that could involve multiple institutions that are interested in building up what's called the blue economy, our maritime economy. You know, we were once...
What kind of jobs are you talking about there?
Well, if it's things related to maritime trades, it's everything from repairing boats and ships. You know, we have Miller Marine Service right off the tip of English Station. That's like the AAA for boats out on Long Island. If an oil tanker is floundering, you have to have whatever is needed, an electrician, a plumber, welder, be able to get on a boat, and they have to have the ability to operate any kind of ship that they're going to work on, and they go out and repair the ship. They also do underwater construction, dock construction. They operate booms. So these are, and we have a port that we are working to reorganize to make more efficient so that this part of our economy, which can't move to Wallingford, can't move down south, that we connect to something back to one of the roots of our strong economy.
Have you run this idea by the city?
Oh, yeah, in depth.
What did they say?
In the beginning, it was full steam ahead.
So to speak.
Pre-pool.
Yeah, and so you can, and so we envisioned something where you could have multiple partners, you could have even training for things, other local jobs where people go out of state at this point for training. For instance, linemen, people that run the McVack trucks, you need a commercial driver's license plus training for handling contaminants. And those are astounding jobs that start at 6 figures.
So I want to ask you guys about what people have said, contrary to what you're thinking. But first, we're listening to Dateline New Haven, WNHH FM. We're talking to 3 people who have been on the ground monitoring what's happened at English Station, pushing for what should happen at English Station since the last century. Answers Farwell, Lee Cruz, and Aaron Good, and we're at a key and decision point in our city now. Before I go on to what people who disagree with you say, I just want to make sure if there's a consensus in this room. Do all 3 of you agree this is not the right place for the pool, that you'd rather see job training and housing on the site? Is that something 3 of you agree with?
What I would say is, I would say that that's what I consistently hear from people in the community and from the representatives, including some representatives that voted in favor of the pool.
And I'm going to get to that, yeah.
Yeah.
Aaron?
My answer is yes and. So, not about the pool specifically, but some part of Ball Island is going to be a park. I think that's absolutely clear. And there's going to be waterfront access, and there's going to be boating access. I mean, and access to the riverfront, and it's going to be part of our New Haven Greenways 2030 network. So that's going to be part of it, I think, no matter what. It's just a question of whether that's the whole thing.
So
and whether there are other boxes that we can check. So it seems like
there might be a lot of agreement with the city, because they're not just talking about a pool, they're talking about a park as well, right? And doesn't that require the higher level of cleanup, or no?
It does, but again, there's a part that is or can be cleaned on Grand Avenue.
Right. So you're saying have the park be there?
That could potentially be the park. I'm not an engineer or scientist. My point is that if communities asking for housing and asking for jobs and job training, then tell us first why you can't do that. Work with us to try to find the options. But there's also one other really important thing. Astra's mentioned, you knock the building down, you take it to a landfill. But it's not just that. 84% of the people who live in Fairhaven are Black and brown, Latino people, Black people. Higher incidence of asthma. Taking down that 5-story building is going to blow all of those contaminants. Whatever doesn't get held down by the hose. I have this image in my head of Yale knocking down the apartment building on Temple.
I remember that. That was a lot of hoses.
And there's a guy there with the hose.
That.
This is Yale. They have 35, whatever it is, buildings and assets, and the guy's there with the hose. Now, I know it'll be more sophisticated than that, but the State Department of Public Health of the state of Connecticut has warning articles. I put one of them in my testimony talking about the inequities of even when development happens, the air quality is going to be affected beyond what happens wherever they take the building. Right there immediately in this predominantly Latino and Black neighborhood.
Do we have consensus in the room that you want to leave the building up? And if there's going to be a park built around it, like Lee said on the first parcel?
I want to find out how much it's going to cost to knock it down versus preserving it. Because obviously, if that's an astronomical, it's so much more expensive, then we have something to talk about. But don't tell me you have to knock it down and not be able to tell me how much that's going to cost compared to remediation.
Yeah, and let me pick up on that. And you mentioned the Armory, Paul. I think that's been a much more holistic and community-led and community-driven process where they've actually done a lot more studies and evaluated different alternatives. And done a bunch of charrettes and raised a lot of money to do these kinds of market analyses and community surveys and all of these things. And that's usually what's done when there's a power plant like this, of this vintage that has a lot of contamination. It's very complicated. When these have been decommissioned across New England, there's always a big kind of comprehensive study, reuse study, alternative study that's done to look at how to deal with this site.
Well, I got the sense from the outside that was kind of happening. Our Anstis group was meeting with the city. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it just stopped like in a second. And all of a sudden, there's this plan for the pool no one had talked about with tens of millions added. That was kind of weird. I mean, what do you think's going on?
It's hard to plumb political decision making, but I'd say it's something that's purely political.
I mean, so like the Washington Ballroom, where someone in charge kind of thinks I have this really good idea, I can get the money, let's just do it. And people like me sometimes say, yeah, just do it. Don't have these like years of charrettes and stuff.
I don't think it was even something about an objection to years of charrette, but something was offered that solved a political problem for the city. So
that's sort of what we heard from the Alders, because I was looking closely at when Laura Gillespie was covering when the Alders approved the first key vote on this, where they voted in favor of this project. And they didn't even want to have a voice vote, so she went and talked to him about how they voted. And she found out it was 17-5 in favor, even though, like at Fairhaven, they're against it, and the Fairhaven Alders were against. And so what people said, it was kind of interesting. Mandy Martinelli technically is the Alder, even though it's not like people living there. It is the edge of her ward, how it was drawn. And she said, I just really want a clean island. So if something's moving forward and the mayor says he's got some money, let's get it cleaned up. And Taisha Walker-Myers, who's the board president, said that this gives us more leverage with the state for the cleanup. Now, does that comport, Aaron, with how you're seeing things work with Pura? Do you think that if we say we're putting a swimming pool there, it's going to help us leverage the cleanup? Did they know what they're talking about?
I think there are benefits to having the city control the site rather than these unnamed LLCs.
So you'd be for eminent domain on that?
Well, I think that the community should be in the driver's seat about what happens there, and not some company based in Long Island or Israel or wherever these LLCs are based. So I think there are some benefits to doing eminent domain and having the city control the site, but that has to be accompanied by a more holistic and community-led process, setting aside money for a comprehensive reuse study, doing community surveys, doing charrettes, doing all of those things that have been done every time a power plant like this has been decommissioned, whether it's Mount Tom or Brayton Point or the Bridgeport Harbor Station plant or the Mira plant in Hartford. It's always been done that there's a big study to look at how to reuse the site, but it's never been done for English Station in 35 years.
That's so interesting. And you talked about race and it's a black and brown neighborhood around it. One advocates are making a big deal that this is going to close the racial swim gap. That black and brown people deserve to have a swimming pool near them. How do you feel about that when you hear that, Lee?
100%.
You say go to Leap and Martinez. History.
I teach that history when I do my historic walks, but that doesn't mean that it has to happen there. That doesn't mean that we negate what Leap has done with their pool and their training, what could be done if we had a proper maintenance budget for the pool at John Martinez, and it doesn't address the issue, the historic injustice issue for the predominantly black population that lives in Hill North and in West River.
Yeah, okay, so I'll be honest with you guys, just to tip my hand. I never got the whole idea of the outdoor pool for $40 million when you got these other pools, and you can even build an outdoor one for a fraction of it on some kind of land. But here's the thing that got in my mind, and I know so much less than you guys do about this, but what keeps popping up in my mind is that the root of this problem is our broken relationship with the monopolies we grant, private monopolies to do our power, which should be public. So in Connecticut, you have 7 or 8 public power authorities owned by municipalities that have been around in some cases for more than 100 years. And they're in some very MAGA areas like Wallingford. Wallingford, they've owned their electric company since the 1800s. They have far fewer blackouts than anywhere else. They pay less for the electricity. So I've been asking people, why can't we have that here? So apparently it's very complicated. They can charge you so much for the distribution lines. They have all this influence in Hartford that makes it hard. But one thing that's slowly happened, and again, you know so much more about this. I know that you guys are deep in this. Microgrids seem to be an alternative that you could, without the prohibitive cost, that you could find places where you could have public control of electricity in a green way. So the best example being what they're doing at Union Station, where they're about to build hundreds of apartments across the street, the old Church Street South and the Wolf Towers, as well as build on the Union Station property. They're doing geothermal energy that the city's going to control. And I just keep wondering, why can't we do English Station historically generated power. Now you're talking about that deal in 1999 that was going to burn coal, was going to be dirty. But why can't, and again, I'm not sure, but as I understand it, there's still all the distribution lines for energy. Right. So one reason we can't do public power often is UI says we're going to charge you so much for the wires, for the poles, for the underground cables, and that here we have it. That old plant, you could get Fairhaven power if you put something new there, and especially we would have leverage, unless, unfortunately, as Aaron points out, we don't really have a strong PURA, but we have an attorney general. I mean, it seemed like we'd have some leverage that if UI say, look, we're not going to push you to do a higher level of cleanup, but we are going to push you to give us this distribution lines for the underwater for the neighborhood. Why not explore some kind of green energy plant that would create jobs and lower electric bills for Fairhaven on that island? Now, I have a sense I'm missing something because no one's pushing this. Like, what am I missing?
I don't think you're missing something. In fact, the group that put together the symposium at Yale about the reuse of power plants, we're doing a second project to actually look exclusively at the situations where the reuse of the power plant, the best thing is to, in fact, make it a green energy project. And this will happen
along with training and job training for people in green tech.
Yeah, this will be something that will be part of Green Build project in New York in October. And so, yes, but one of the things that we have heard from people in Fairhaven, Yukon Circa program did a big project in Fairhaven about resiliency for the neighborhood, because it is basically an island. There's a lot of flood and storm surge risks there. And one of the issues is how to protect it if you had a major power outage. And so one thing that has come up is, could you have reserve batteries somewhere located on the island?
Or would the island flood, though? I guess you'd raise it.
It depends on where you put them within the building or the site. And part of the plan for the remediation of the site and really the Mill River overall is to do work on both banks of the Mill River and the island itself to create stronger natural systems to deal with storm surges. So you first study how far can you go and what level of protection can you create?
So that instead of being in danger, it would actually help them out in the storm. Is it realistic, Aaron?
Yeah. So, Paul, I think I always talk about turning this symbol of New Haven's post-industrial decline into a symbol of our 21st century renaissance. And what better way to do that than to make English Station into a kind of clean energy demonstration site? I think that's a beautiful vision. But to your larger question, look, UI has a problem with being a good neighbor. Okay, this company was founded in New Haven and Bridgeport 130 years ago. Now, no longer gives a shit about us at all. Whether you're talking about their tree cutting policies or their plan to build these hideous 110 kilovolt monopoles between New Haven and Bridgeport, which has just been incredibly controversial, just an absolute public relations disaster for them, or you're talking about their failure to deal with their legacy infrastructure, like English Station. They just have a real problem with being a good neighbor.
And they don't want the competition, obviously, from a municipally owned power plant. However, Iberdrola, their parent company, is a world leader in green energy, specifically solar. Tell me a little more, because again, you know more than I do about this stuff. If we were to imagine green energy there, what form of green energy would work there? Is there enough space for significant solar?
There isn't.
Geothermal?
It doesn't, even as a layperson and someone who's trying to get solar on my house and has had difficulty because of the angle of my roof, the amount of land space is critical. But we have in New Haven, Southern Connecticut State University, they have a joint business energy management program degree. We have in New Haven, UNH, they expanded their marine biology program into the building at Long Wharf. They're leasing a part of that from the city. We have in New Haven, Climate Haven, which is attracting entrepreneurs from all over the country. We have at Ball Station the river divided into two parts. One part is navigable, the other part is not. Is there any potential there for tidal energy that could be used not for the whole city, but for Fairhaven?
Or hydrogen. Like, do you think we could have a municipal authority that would power Fairhaven?
Yeah. Well, but my point is, these conversations are not being had. We're, as a city, talking to a multimillionaire about an outdoor swimming pool to be used from May to September if you're lucky, and then what happens? So we have options that we're not exploring. That doesn't mean they're all going to come to be.
Yeah, I'm just curious, given that you guys know more than me, I'm curious how realistic a power thing like that is.
That's why we need a study.
Right. And what I'd say, to step back one half step, is to emphasize that the building is an asset. And even people in City Hall, when we were working with us, were very grateful that we showed up, were amazed by the expertise of our team, and said we'd rather have a 110,000 square foot building than a flattened, capped island.
And again, a building doesn't
Right.
get you a lot of exposure for solar power, but there are other kinds of power,
Right.
green power, energy.
Yeah.
So this is all interesting. So
But the other thing is, there's really something to think about. You have to study an asset before you make a precipitous decision, and that hasn't been done.
yeah.
You know, I think that some of the people that have been very supportive of us, they are tuned into all of these issues of, you know, the original green is preservation, that you're not throwing all of the embodied energy into a landfill. You know, start with that. But also, I think I'm never embarrassed to talk about beauty and landmarks. It's an amazing thing. And imagine if that thing that helps shape that area is just gone, the most standout things will be the substation and the gigantic high power
It was just to me when I
lines.
stand on Martinez Field or behind City
Yeah,
Seat.
it's an
I'm
amazing
always
view.
amazed how much land there is and how much room there is for the stuff they want to spend extra tens of millions of dollars to do at English Station. That's just the part that I'm having trouble getting
So
past.
why not use, if you wanted a swimming pool, there's all kinds of city-owned land that you don't have to use eminent domain
So
for. You could put a floating pool in the water and then never, we're a city with very limited land. Our taxes are going up. And where are we going to grow? So why not do something like this, like New York is doing with its Plus Pool project? Put it in the water.
So I think what I'm hearing consensus here, even though the details might differ, is first and foremost, if you were in charge, if you guys today were in charge of the city, you'd say, halt this pool idea. Let's study it seriously and look at a lot of angles. Let's look especially what the neighborhood's asking for with jobs and housing, what Answers is looking for, preserving the building, and obviously get on the stick of what Aaron's talking about and finally getting them to clean up the darn thing. Anything else before I let you go? If you were in charge, and then Paul's little pet thing about the power. What is there anything else you'd like to say before I let you go about what you would like the city do if you could convince them to change direction?
To start working with us again.
Okay.
I would say go on the Urban Design League's website, click on the English Station tab. There are a number of different studies that are there looking at case studies in other places about how very similar facilities all across the country, all across the world, have been successfully adaptively reused.
Lee?
And what I would say is we talked about what the community has repeatedly said that they want. We've talked about the fact that there's a bunch of unknowns having to do with what will happen to the air quality should they demolish the building. But also I'd like to remind people, when I do my walks in Fairhaven, I always tell people the difference between this building and many other buildings is this building, literally like a cathedral, was built to the glory of God in the 1920s, when if 1 yard of concrete would do, they would use 3 because you could, and because they didn't know as much about engineering back then. I think we have no idea how much it would cost to knock this building down, not only in terms of health, but also in terms of actual money, and that needs, to Aaron's point, needs to be studied before we move.
And as Answers points
forward.
out, what's lost in terms of character, identity, and purpose
on
and
top of
history.
that.
It's
All
a New
right.
Haven icon.
Well, obviously, talk about New Haven icons. The three of you are New Haven icons. I always learn
Thank
so
you.
much from all three of you, and I appreciate the
As are
tireless.
you.
You guys put
Yes.
so much
Yes,
time
Paul.
into making the city a better place and allow dummies like me to follow what's up. So, thanks to Harry Jost behind the trolls. Thanks to Answers Farwell, Lee Cruz, and Aaron Good for volunteering their time here. And so the conversation's not over, folks. Let's keep talking about what English Station can be, because I have a suspicion that we're not going to find $43 million for the swimming pool, or 63 if that's what it cost to demolish it. So I have a feeling, just like conversations started decades ago, it's not over. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us on WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.